It's Saturday, October 11th, and we have two big storms impacting the United States today. Those two are going to be highlighted by our two pretty separate marginal risk. We have one on the very far eastern coast of the US, kind of centered on the outer banks of North Carolina. Then we have another one out here in kind of the southwest and Great Basin region. It's really going to be centered on Utah. And in both of these, the main risk that we're looking at is going to be for that threat of some damaging winds, potentially in excess of 60 miles an hour. I don't really think we'll see anything much higher than that, but definitely want to be on the lookout for some severe winds today. Some gusts could potentially even reach up to 65, 70 miles an hour. Then for our hail threat, that threat is going to be non-existent out here on our eastern coast risk area. Then it kind of follows a weird boomerang shape out here, mostly covering the same area in Utah, potentially seeing some 1 to 1.5 inch in diameter hail today. And then for our tornado risk, there actually is going to be one in kind of both of our regions. Actually, it's going to cover our entire marginal risk in the Outer Banks. Then in the very far southeastern corner of Utah and then far northeastern corner of Arizona, there's a very small chance for a couple of weak spin up tornadoes there as well today. I also think that chance is going to be pretty small and even kind of close to zero. Now, the main risk area today, I think, is actually going to be out west in our southwestern and Great Basin risk area. It's all going to start in the very early morning hours today with a little bit of a system kind of pushing north and eastward, brought by some tropical remnants of something kind of coming out of the Pacific. This is actually going to play a big role in stabilizing the atmosphere ahead of our storms today, and kind of leaves a lot of questions about how well the atmosphere will be able to recover and if our storms will even be that strong today. It will also do a couple of things that could potentially leave a couple of outflow boundaries or areas which could take advantage of some convergence later in the day. One is going to be in central Utah and another one in central Arizona. Both of those lines could potentially produce a couple of semi-discrete stronger storms, bringing that threat of some damaging winds, small hail, and then even specifically right here in northeastern Arizona and then also southeastern Utah, we could also see maybe the threat for a weak spin-up tornado or two. That's kind of highlighted by the semi-discrete cell right here from the HRRR. Now, of course, there are going to be more storms in this. We're actually just going to see a lot of storms out here in Arizona today. That is going to be kind of brought by a high pressure system, bringing a lot of organizing shear to that. That's also going to be another big story with these. There's just so much organizing shear in front of those. That's actually going to kind of be carrying our weather today, specifically severe weather, kind of producing a chance for a lot of these storms to get organized, produce those big, strong rotating updrafts, and produce those threats and hazards that we do see with severe weather. Now, there is going to be a secondary line pushing through Utah. This is going to be from our main cold front, kind of brought by that big trough pushing through. This could also bring some damaging winds. Not really much of a hail risk there. And then that tornado threat is also going to be very, very small with this. Now, moving a bit northward, we're not really going to see any of the weird stuff or interaction from a tropical system kind of moving onshore from the Pacific, or at least remnants of it. It's just going to be from that big cold front and trough that was bringing some of our severe weather in that secondary line that we were mentioning down in Utah. It's going to be pretty much solely from that. Now, the only thing to mention is that there are going to be a couple of short waves within this, and our cold front isn't really as uniform as this appears right here. There are a couple of kinks and a couple of embedded low pressure systems and short waves. That's why it appears that we're not really seeing a super organized line right here on the HRRR. But nonetheless, I definitely do think this line, which will stretch all the way up through Montana, could potentially bring some damaging winds, maybe some small hail, really anywhere in this line, but I still do think that tornado threat is going to remain pretty close to zero. The HRRR is actually even kind of latching onto a couple of more organized storms or embedded supercells within this line, specifically up here in Montana, maybe hinting at some stronger storms up there, but I think that overall threat for some damaging winds is really going to be the main thing consistent throughout this entire line. But taking a shift all the way to the other coast, this is going to be for our Outer Banks, North Carolina region. And the main thing right here is that this almost looks like a tropical system, but it is not. It is just a low pressure system from a trough that kind of happens to be tracing the eastern edge of the US. Now, a couple of reasons why there is that threat for severe weather out in the Outer Banks are going to be some of the fronts put in place by this low pressure system. One of them is going to be a stationary front almost on top of that, and then also kind of a warm front kind of ejecting northward. Now, when these connect, there definitely is going to be the potential for some more favorable shear in this region and a couple of stronger storms. And then for the rest of the far southeast that's going to be experiencing this today, of course, as we go into tomorrow, it's going to push north, maybe affecting some areas in the mid-Atlantic more. But as for now, it looks like it's just going to be a lot of rain and gusty weather for coastal North Carolina and South Carolina, and then even potentially reaching parts of Southern Virginia maybe by this evening. So definitely, of course, want to look out if you're in the Outer Banks, far eastern North Carolina region. That's going to be the main area to watch today for some stronger storms. But of course, if you're in any of the areas I just mentioned, just a lot of rain and wind today. Now, this map gives us a much better look at our jet stream and kind of a better idea on why a lot of our weather is occurring where it is. We're going to start with that big trough out west. This is why we're going to see kind of that uniform line all the way up from Arizona to Montana. And then, of course, we're going to see that messy area of flow right in front of it, kind of bringing a lot of our prefrontal storms. And also, we can see that those are from tropical remnants from the Pacific pushing up and through. That's going to bring definitely a more interesting setup today, but that's just why that's happening. And there's a lot of messy storms expected in front of this big trough. We also do have a low pressure system kind of moving through parts of the Northeast. That's why we could potentially see a couple of thunderstorms up here, maybe in Pennsylvania and New York today. Then, of course, that big low pressure system kind of tracing the eastern coast today, a bit more flow specifically off the coast, kind of going into that main region of concern in far eastern North Carolina. That is going to be another reason why we could see some stronger storms there today as well. Now, this is a weather sounding that I took from our more western risk area, and I think it's particularly interesting because our parameters like Cape aren't really expected to be super great because of those messy storms in the morning really stabilizing out the atmosphere. But we are going to notice a couple of things which are going to kind of carry these storms today, making them severe. The first and foremost thing is going to be the really high amount of bulk shear, allowing these storms to become super organized and maybe even producing some strong updrafts. That's going to be 54 knots of bulk shear. That is extremely high. Definitely think we're going to see some organized storms today, producing severe characteristics out in that region because of this. Now, that reason why we could potentially see a tornado threat in that very specific area in northeastern Arizona, southeastern Utah. It's because our low level shear isn't going to be that bad. 13 knots, that's definitely not that poor, especially with the really organized storms that we're expecting from that 54 knots of bulk shear. Then our low level SRH isn't great, but it's 50. Definitely not bad, and that's also going to help to make that chance of tornadoes non-zero. Then, of course, our cloud base is going to be low enough for that to be a possibility. Now, for other things like damaging winds, we have a really high amount of dry air aloft. That's going to really help to produce that threat of some damaging winds. And then although our moisture isn't super high, it's only 44 dew point, we are going to be at a higher elevation above sea level. Definitely kind of lowering the need for super high moisture because as we go up, you really don't need as much moisture to produce severe weather as you would at maybe sea level, like in an area such as Florida. But for the last thing we're going to look at, just taking a quick peek at the tropics, still have Tropical Storm Jerry out here. It kind of peaked in intensity last night, and it looks like it's just going to continue that curve out towards the Atlantic. We have post-tropical Karen, which formed out here, not going to pose a threat to the United States at all. And then we have no areas of expected development for the next 7 days. Now, the models have been hinting at maybe something getting going in the Central American gyre, but as for a immediate look for anything we're worried about, there's not really anything going on out here. So it definitely looks like that trend of maybe seeing the first season where we don't see a hurricane landfall in the US in 10 years could come true. Let's hope that stays kind of on that course. But right now, definitely looking good out in the tropics.